Hello and namaste from Buzzonearth. My name is Gayatri. I'm the founder of Buzzonearth, a sustainability mainstreaming platform of Indian origin. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the second season of Buzzonearth CloudChats today. And we are starting this with the hottest topic that is being discussed, that is COP27. And all the discussions and nuances around it are also pretty relevant right now. A lot of people are, still doubting the success of COP27. That is the biggest climate change conference that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. So we have somebody very important who has been at the driving seat to answer some of the questions that have been floating around. So please join me in welcoming our guest today, Mr. Ovais Sarmad, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And let's stay tuned. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Sarmad. It's a huge pleasure to host you again at Buzzonearth. And after COP27, I'm sure there must be a lot of action going on at UN climate change. And since you are at the main driving seat when it comes to these international negotiations, treaties, resolutions being signed, and deliberations, what have they concluded into, what have they converged into? So it's truly a privilege for me to interview you today. And I really look forward to some amazing insights and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gayatri. It's a pleasure for me to be with you and Buzzonearth another time. Not so long ago, we had another interview on a different topic, but this time after COP27, I believe it's an important moment to share some thoughts, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. And just by way of introduction, so I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary for the United Nations Climate Change. We are based here in Germany, in Bonn, and just came out of COP27. So we'll be happy to share a few thoughts.
Welcome once again. And thank you for agreeing to be with us today and answer some of the questions that have been floating around. And to begin with, I will start with something which may sound a little humorous. Very recently, I came across somebody and I just, happened to ask, what after COP27? And that was, of course, part of the larger conversation that we were having. Somebody who was not part of the conversation, that person turned around and said, COP28. And that made me really step back and think that actually, while this may sound like a joke, but there is some truth and concern which is associated with this. I mean, starting with COP1 till COP28, it has actually come a long way, right? So if we look at, and I'm not asking us to trace the history, it is more about tracing the progress, how it has changed over time and what kind of outcomes have come from COP and with what objective was this set up? And are we really attuned to what it was supposed to achieve? So how would you, describe the transition and the journey of COP from then till now?
Thank you. Now, that's an interesting question, and I can fully understand whoever asked that question. And let me start first by making a brief clarification for the audience and those who may not know. COPs are Conference of the Parties. So in our organization, the countries who are represented, they're referred to as parties. So when they get together, and that is what our organization does to bring all the parties together, so that is the COP. And we are 30 years since the adoption of the first convention that happened in 1992. And your question is spot on, that a lot of people ask, in those 30 years, what has the process achieved or not? And we just had COP27, and your interaction with the person you mentioned, that what happens next is COP28. So that is not, it may sound not a very promising outlook, but let me quickly reflect. In all those years, first of all, it was the convention. So the world recognized that there is a huge issue with the environment that we are living in and what is happening to that environment and what the implications are. So that was the first recognition. And after that, every year, there have been huge deliberations. And as you can imagine, when you have 198 countries from different perspectives, different geopolitical backgrounds to come together and agree on what needs to happen. So that's what the process has done. And the major achievements have been, first of all, bringing the awareness to the whole world about the damage that is being created by the greenhouse gas emissions. So that was one. And that has grown over the years. And as you can imagine, if you go back to 25, 30 years ago, many people didn't even know about what the issues were. But
That's
today,
great.
a lot of people,
Yeah.
I would say a majority, especially the youth, they know what is happening and what needs to be done. So the COP processes, although not directly, but they have generated this ecosystem, if you like, in the global arena to highlight the problem and present the solutions. And the biggest solutions that have been presented were in different decisions over the years that all countries agree to, and they go back and have to implement those through the legislations. And one of the most important one happened in COP21, which is 2015, and that's the Paris Agreement. And that was a landmark agreement which brought all the parties together, and they all unanimously agreed that, look, there is a serious problem,
Yes.
and we need to stop the global emissions and stop. When we say stop, then they have to put a limit. And that limit was not to overshoot the global warming beyond 2 degrees, preferably remaining within 1.5.
Right.
So that is a very important universal decision outcome. So that I see as a huge, huge success in the geopolitical world. When you take a small country in a remote Pacific island to a big country like United States or Europe or United Kingdom, Germany for that matter, and India, China. So all those countries, they have to agree, which they did.
Right.
So that is a breakthrough. And then since then, after that agreement in 2015, the COP21, it has been about how to implement it. So there are those decisions, but then we have to, like in our personal lives, if we take a decision to stop, exercising more or living in a more sustainable way, then we have to have a plan on how to do it. So since COP21 in Paris or Paris Agreement, every COP has advanced on how to implement the Paris Agreement. And that concluded last year in Glasgow. So all countries agreed to the detailed plan and the tools and the rules on how Paris Agreement will be implemented to make sure that, to ensure that countries and all sectors of the societies will remain within that 1.5 degree limit. So that's what has been happening, and because climate change is such an issue that it doesn't end at a COP.
Right.
It's a continuing issue, so that has to continue. So COP27 we just finished in Sharm el-Sheikh, we'll talk more about it, and then next year it's in Dubai, COP28, and so on. And in between there are many other events that happen, and all those are directed towards addressing the threat of climate change and providing concrete solutions to everybody.
So that's a very comprehensive response, and it would be fair to conclude that probably there has to be a plan of action, and then there has to be a measurement, metric to be there at a global level, which is measuring the progress and commitments and the implementation of those commitments on a month-on-month basis that gets probably checked and presented each year at COP. So maybe it's more like an annual convening to measure where we stand now vis-a-vis where we were last year. So it is not like yet another, convening just for the heck of it. So great. So that brings me to the second question, that is around COP27. And seemingly, it appears to be many people have actually a negative outlook as well. We have seen many articles that are claiming it to be a disappointment. Some of them are saying that, yeah, it was good, it was not that bad. However, I am a very optimistic person, and I feel that this COP27 has really been a positive COP when it comes to the kind of, directionally positive change it has taken, like especially the loss and damage fund. Till now, this dialogue did not really get that consensus that it was deserving, that because there are a lot of reparations that are to be done. There are vulnerable countries that are most susceptible to the kind of climate change events, and they are the ones who will be affected the most. And this is the first time that 200 country delegates have agreed to come to a common consensus that yes, we do accept and there has to be some allocation on that front. However, the exact allocation by when that gets realized and who will be monitoring that, and how does that translate into the NDCs that are already in place, I think a lot of open-ended questions are there. So I would like to understand from you, how would you rate COP27 as per the chair that you are in?
Yeah, no, again, thank you for that question. And yeah, that question is being asked by everybody around the world. And let me preface that by clarifying something that I firmly believe, that we read the headlines in the media, be it mainstream or social media or any media headlines, they tend to capture just the one aspect or one perspective of any major event like what we had in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So, but that headline does not illustrate or accurately show what actually happened and what are the elements that make up that headline. So the headlines we have seen is, yes, COP27 was produced the outcome on loss and damage. I'll get to that in a minute. But on other areas, it didn't deliver. So what we need to understand there is the climate change issue is so huge and it's so critical and it's so urgent. No event can fully and comprehensively address it. It moves forward in the right direction, but it needs everybody else to then converge and take action. So that's what COP27 has done. And like you, I'm a congenital optimist. And we need to continue to drive that momentum to have everybody engaged and do the right thing. And that's what I strongly, strongly believe that COP27 was able to do. Bringing countries from around the world, from the north, the south, the rich and not so rich, and countries in transition, and they all agreed, first of all, to maintain that 1.5 degree limit that we all need to adhere to. That's a big consensus decision. Then they also agreed that there should be progress on all aspects of climate change, in adaptation, in mitigation, in transparency, in capacity building and skills and all of that. And as you rightly mentioned, after a lengthy, and it took a number of years, to agree on the loss and damage facility and the fund.
Yeah.
So that was a breakthrough. That was a momentous, even a historical decision.
Yes.
Because as you rightly said, there are some countries and societies who are living at the forefront of the impact of climate change in the small islands, in the least developing countries, in countries which are more prone and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So they deserve special and urgent attention. So this was a recognition that that will happen, and how is then through a fund, which is the loss and damage fund, which will be operationalized to provide immediate and urgent support to those countries and people who are at the forefront. Of course, again, the details and the rules and regulations of how such a fund will be operationalized and implemented still needs to be done. So I can get to that in a minute. But that was a momentous decision. And I was there throughout those negotiations until the last minute. It wasn't clear. It wasn't a given way that it will happen.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it required a very intense geopolitical engagement
Right.
for that to happen. So that is quite an important achievement. So all in all, I rate COP27 as successful, as a meaningful success, which has laid the pathway for loss and damage, and also to keep those big principles alive. And we now need to make sure that those will need to happen very, very quickly. Now, very briefly on loss and damage.
Yeah.
So yes, the decision was made to establish a fund, and they also agreed that the timeline for it to be operationalized should be very short. So by COP28, those operational guidelines of the fund will need to be finalized. So the first transitional committee will meet in March, and they will work out the details and present it to COP28. And by the time all countries will start coming together to provide funding to make sure that those funds are available. And then once those rules and how to operationalize the fund are finalized, then we expect that those countries who are in most need will start receiving some financial support for their adaptation.
Great. And I know at the face of it, it does talk about poor and vulnerable countries, but somewhere India is also on the verge of, surrounded three sides with the sea and the kind of developing and emerging economic conditions here. So we do have to, I do not know where it is standing at the moment, but would like to understand, is it having any long drawn plan that does include countries that are having a population of this size that does require, because I'll tell you where I'm coming from. So for countries like India that have the priorities of development over, because they have to feed the poor, they have to run the basics, and they are not in that situation yet that they can totally focus on sustainable development as much they should otherwise. But the best part is this, that since they are not developed, there is also an opportunity lying in there that they can develop the right way. They need not develop the way the West has developed, right? So there is a lot of wrong, what you say, or maybe not so good case studies out there of development, which can be completely violated, and you can develop in the most optimized and climate positive manner. So for that to happen, there is enormous need for innovation. There is enormous need for I would say the collaboration on capacity building side, technology integration, and of course, the climate finance that needs to be diverted towards countries like India. So how would COP27 and the Loss and Damage Fund address that?
Again, a good question. I'll have to go back a few steps and maybe explain the context of countries like India, China, and other countries or big emerging economies. India is now, I think, the second or third largest economy in the world. China also very, very important in that matter. And they're also at the same time developed, as you rightly said. And if you
they're
look
most
at
populous as well. So that adds to the
absolutely. And then we shouldn't also overlook African continent as a whole.
yes.
It's also developing. So you're absolutely right. So what we need to understand is that the problem that we are confronted with was created by the huge industrial revolution that happened 70, 80 years ago, which created this problem of greenhouse gas emissions. And those countries that like India, China, the African continent, and other countries, they have aspirations for their development, to bring their populations out of poverty, to provide energy, to provide the development opportunities to their populations. So they have two ways of doing it. They can go back and do the way that created the original problem by digging in for more fossil fuels and destroying the environment and and contributing even more to that problem of emitting greenhouse gas emissions, or to leapfrog to renewable, sustainable, and circular economies. And that the most important thing there is it is possible now, as you rightly said, innovation, transformation, and the opportunities that are there. Yeah. So it's a question of those countries then to actually leapfrog and benefit, because now the renewable sources of energies are cheaper than going down and digging for more fossil fuel, which is more expensive, and it leaves stranded assets in many countries. So that's what needs to happen. So that transformation, and that is generated, or that is fueled by innovation. And in COP27, we saw that. The companies and countries who are innovating at a massive scale, they were there showcasing, they were there providing the solution, they were there connecting those countries to say, well, look, if you want, in different sectors, be it fashion, be it in sports or textiles or aviation or ship. So there are ways of doing that leapfrog transformation. So again, I felt at COP27 extremely encouraged that those solutions are there, and there was a possibility to connect those who need those solutions and those who can provide those solutions. And we saw many interactions and agreements that happened, but those did not get the kind of headline that the politicians often provide. So there is a lot of other things that happen, especially in the private sector and innovation arena.
So does it call for, I know that I'm slightly digressing here, but does it call for a fund which is different from loss and damage fund, but it does encourage innovation for emerging economies like India, where the best of technology, the best of solutions can be integrated, experimented, because innovation requires a lot of R&D, innovation requires a lot of reiteration and experiments, so that it's not just a laboratory experiment. It is also something which is having a viable market out there, which can be scaled, which can be adopted in different regions, which is replicable, scalable, and everything. So when it comes to innovation, I feel, and since you are mentioning that at COP27, you were encouraged to see the amount of innovation and the track record that it would have, do you think it calls for some kind of fund on innovation for such countries?
Yeah, no, that's also a good question. I personally don't believe that there should be a fund such as that, because the reason is because for innovation to be successful and implemented at scale and at the pace that is required, it is not through a granting of funds through donation. Finance should be available and should be sourced for innovation technologies that are sustainable, marketable, and can drive that change. And that cannot happen by funds that are given as grants or a donation. So that I strongly believe it's not so much the fund, but a platform where a marketplace, where the innovators on the one hand and those who need those solutions and technologies are brought together, and they interact in a way that is commercially viable, and they implement those solutions. So it's actually more relevant and maybe more powerful than a fund in inverted commas. Okay. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening at the COPs.
All right. So that also leads me to the next question, that is around the urgency of the whole matter, and why do we feel that there would be probably a requirement of some kind of seed capital for innovation economy to kick in. As per the latest emissions gap report from UNEP, we see that we are not left with more than 8 years when it comes to the available carbon budget, and that is as per the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. So that is quite alarming, actually, because 8 years is a very, very short window. I mean, if you look at 8 years back, we were in 2014, and 2014, I was at ISB. I know that it is not even like, it's not even, it seems like it was yesterday, right? So how these 8 years will pass, we will probably not even get to know. But if these are the 8 years where it is about make or break, that really kicks in the sense of urgency that things must happen now, even when it comes to regenerative action. So that is one of the areas of focus when I was at COP27. This was very important because if something has to be planted now, it will take about 6 to 7 years to grow. And the impact of that regeneration will be realized only after that, which means that in next 2 years, it must be planted. It must be, so I'm talking about forest in that case. So it must be realized in those 2 years. Similarly, when it comes to innovation on the technology front, again, the same timelines do come in. So whatever change has to happen, whatever scaling has to happen of, say, clean energy transition, all of these transitions must happen within these 8 years. So, and there is one more confusion that is around the convergence of these timelines, because many, for instance, the soil report that was talking about 60 years of farmable land that is available, then the water report that was talking about 2050 timelines. So we have some 2 to 3 different kind of timelines that are floating around, and somewhere we need the convergence so that the real urgency is realized and executed. So how would you want to suggest that United Nations climate change converges these timelines and also supports the real action beyond that?
Great. Now, thank you. I'd like to start by reminding us that there is a very important framework that brings all those different timelines and actions in a very comprehensive and integrated way. That's the 2030 agenda, that the SDGs, right?
Yes. Yes.
So SDGs have a time frame to be accomplished by 2030, and climate action is one of those SDGs, SDG 13. And you rightly said there are different reports that provide that give a different timeline for different areas that need to be addressed: food, water, forests, and so on. But for us, when we take climate change in a comprehensive way, we refer to Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement provides the timelines. Yes, 2030, this decade it's a decade of action by 2030.
Yeah.
But what is important is by 2030, we need to cut emissions by 45%. So that is very clear. The science, and it is supported by science.
Yes.
Unanimous science, the IPCC,
yeah,
which clearly spells out what are those limits that need to happen. So by 2030, yes, that needs to happen. And by 2050, we need to get to net zero. Now, your question about are we converging? Are other processes and other organizations doing what they need to? I believe yes. Give you an example. For instance, we are closely working with our two other sister, if you like, organizations or conventions. CCD, which is concerned with desertification, soil, and biodiversity. The COP of biodiversity is happening in a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
So we work very, very closely together. So my belief that there is that, yes, there may be different timelines for different UN actions, but they interact, they intercede, they converge with each other. So if you take action in one, they have implications on the other one. And those actions, if they're positive, if they're good, if they're going in the right direction, they have a multiplier effect on the others, and vice versa. If you don't, then we are extending those timelines, which is not a good thing. So that is happening, but maybe it's not so obvious or evident in the media uptakes, and but I can assure you that is what happens, and we take that very seriously in the NDCs that are submitted by different countries and the different actions. So for us, it's very clear. 2030, we need to bring down emissions by 45% and look ahead to mid-century to get to net zero. Now, to reflect on your first question or reflection is that happening, or where are we with that? So if we go back, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 years from today, I see there is a huge development in the right direction. We're going in the right direction. It's not maybe at the pace and the urgency at times, but there is huge realization everywhere, anywhere in the world. I talk to many people from around the world with different sectors and different backgrounds. Everyone is now aware of what is happening in our environment, the impacts of climate change, and not only aware, willing to take action.
Willing to take action.
So that's a big thing. And if you go back, if you reverse, if you look at the archives of media reports 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would not see that. But that has happened. So there is I strongly believe we are living through a revolution almost. And that is the climate action revolution, which is happening.
Right. I remember in 2019, when we spoke, one of the questions that I had presented to you that time was, there are a lot of naysayers who do not even believe in the whole climate change phenomenon. They were questioning that how can the human scale be causing anything that big and huge, right? So from 2019 till 22, even in these 3 years, there is enormous change. Probably COVID has also played its role in making people more aware, but there is substantive change in the awareness level and the will to do something about it. So will to do something about it also brings me to the next part of the discussion that is mostly revolving around the fund allocations and how do we track that and how is that monitored over time, and what gets priority, because there's a lot of discussion around the carbon markets, the adaptation, nature-based solutions, a lot of new developments, especially the ENACT initiative that has happened during COP27. So a lot of such positive initiatives have been highlighted that are going to bring some positive difference also. So how are we going to track them all, and is there a mechanism in place that will be keeping a track, plus also bringing that transparency in what's being progressed and what's being achieved?
Yes. Again, I'd like to refer back to the Paris Agreement. One of the cornerstones or pillars of Paris Agreement is all about transparency of action.
Right.
And in our process, and you can look it up, we have something referred to as the Enhanced Transparency Framework, ETF. And we UNFCCC are the ones who are custodians of that framework, and we facilitate countries and non-party stakeholders to ensure that their actions are in conformity with that transparency framework. So they need to report transparently, and then we then help also then combine and capture those transparent actions and report back to the world at large. And that will happen in COP28, which will focus on global stocktake. And that is precisely the purpose of the transparency framework, to bring all actions in a transparent way. And that trickles down to every sector of the society, including to individuals, you and me. So whatever we are doing, we need to be very transparent about it. What actions we are taking and how we're doing that. And that will culminate into the countries, and countries will need to report on their actions, and those actions can be measured. And that's where the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they're the scientists who measure, who provide the perspective on how those actions are adding up towards the desired objectives. So it is very well structured, that is built in to make sure that everyone is held accountable by their own actions. and reported on where those actions have led us or not, or what are the gaps. So that is an important thing in every aspect of our lives, right? If we don't measure, we can't improve.
That's
anything
right.
for that matter. So the measurement part of is an extremely important. So enhanced transparency framework of our process actually provides that.
And that's a wonderful initiative, and that definitely be required after so many initiatives have already, kicked in after COP27. There is one very basic question that often we face whenever we are talking about United Nations. Many people think that United Nations is some central, what do you say, authority to compel countries to do things or to watch whether they are doing it right or not. I would like to hear from the horse's mouth, what kind of power does United Nations have in ensuring that the right action is happening as per the commitments made by these countries? So what kind of, the discipline can be enforced in order to make it happen?
Well, first of all, I'm not a horse. No, but I do understand what you're asking. And United Nations is a set of different organizations that bind us together with the principles that are laid out very clearly in the UN Charter. But for us, it's about addressing climate change. But to answer your question, no, United Nations is not a policing body. It's not a body which names and shames. It's not a body that compels any country, or for that matter, any sector of the society to do anything. But we have a very important moral and ethical responsibility to show to the world what needs to happen and for what reasons, and provide the tools and the solutions so that the countries can adopt and implement those. And that is really our role. And we facilitate that. And the way it then advances is that when countries start implementing those, as I mentioned in my previous response to the previous question, if it's done in a transparent way, which is reported, then let's say you are a country and I'm a country, then you can see what I'm doing, right, and I can see what you're doing, and that then generates a, if you like, a competition for countries to then do more of the right thing.
That's a virtuous cycle. That's a virtuous.
So that is the way United Nations then advances and brings everyone together around an issue, in this case, climate change. So everyone then moves together. Sometimes it's not all in the same pace or same importance because of the various geopolitical differences of the countries, but they all recognize that we need to go there.
Great. So this is, from my end, these are the questions that I wanted to ask. I'm just taking a pause here and would like you to also, help me ask anything which probably we have not covered, so that also gets addressed, because I think we have captured the spectrum of things which are related to COP and the plan ahead for next 10 years, but anything more than that?
No, thank you, Gayatri. And first of all, again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I believe this was a very good conversation. The topic is very important and very complex, and it's not always possible to cover all aspects of it. But in asking you, what I would like to say is that, first of all, I greatly appreciate the kind of work that you're doing, the organization that you have set up, the Buzzonearth. And my request to you is to don't set yourself any limits in terms of reaching out, in terms of conveying the urgency, the importance of the cause and the action that needs to be taken, and interact and connect with as many actors and stakeholders out there to advance the overall objective of our existence, that we need to live in a sustainable, in a responsible manner, and to highlight what happens if we don't. And that's what you're doing, and I wish you all the very best. And if there is anything we can do to help you, we'll be more than happy to do that. And remain focused and also be part of the process that we represent in UNFCCC. And as you already do, make sure that you reach out to the farthest first, meaning those who are at the far end of the societies and the areas that are hard to reach. So what I'm talking about is to making sure that the messages are conveyed in the local languages, local cultures, and through youth, through indigenous populations. So everyone should be part of that solution. So, and you as an organization can do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarmad. That was quite encouraging to hear that from you. And we are committed to do that. As the tagline says, mainstreaming sustainability. And here we are working hard to accelerate climate action, because sustainability has a longer agenda and it is there to stay even beyond the point where we have already tackled climate. But climate action requires utmost urgency, and we are trying to push the boundaries and trying to connect the dots, bringing in the stakeholders, including corporates, businesses, United Nations, all of us together. How do we push the agenda forward? So we remain committed to that. And as, in terms of support, I would, based on the questions that I have been asking, and that's also not just our ask, it is from the larger ecosystem of the innovators worldwide. There are a lot of good ideas that just do not see the light of the day just because they do not get the necessary funding at the right time, right? So everything has interconnected impact, and that somewhere impacts the larger deadline and the things that have not happened, which were to happen. So we need to probably give more and more focus towards the innovation ecosystem, towards the ecosystem working at the ecosystem level also. For instance, Buzzonearth is not solving any one problem, but we are trying to create an ecosystem that spurs innovation and urgency of climate action. So we are supporting it at the ecosystem level. So these are the two areas where I would see and would love to see more focus going forward as we continue to push the boundaries forward in the next 8 years from here till 2030.
Great. Now I fully agree with you. And as we mentioned, and you witnessed at the COP27, I saw a huge expansion of innovation. There was an innovation zone, there was an innovation hub. There are different organizations that are focusing only on that. And as you rightly said, there are many individuals and organizations who are providing very creative innovation tools. Sometimes they don't get the necessary acknowledgement, recognition, and funding. But what we saw in COP27, there are different organizations who are trying to do just that. And it's a question of time. It'll happen.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarmad, for your time and your very articulate and comprehensive responses. It was truly a pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gayatri, and I wish you all the best. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope your audience will also appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Namaste.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.